So Eve, are you from South Florida?
Yeah, I'm from the Tampa area.
Oh, from Tampa.
Yeah. I kind of split my time between Orlando ACG and Tampa ACG.
Okay, great.
Steve, what do you do? Public capital councils, so we represent businesses that are looking for capital and to solve that problem. Yeah. John?
Yeah, I'm a professional CEO and county services.
Greenville, South Carolina.
Just right now because
Ford Financial.
I had to move everything over there because I didn't have a power strip. So I was sorry about
I'm going to give you 2 minutes and then we'll get started. We'll be very informal and you guys can ask questions. Come through.
You want Jordan for all the listeners?
Maybe. Maybe that would be a good idea. Hello, ladies. Jennifer, good to see you. Good to see you too. We'll give it 4 more minutes and then we'll get started on this. All right.
I feel like we just got sealed in.
I was like, what was that? All right. I think I'm going to go ahead and get started and just introduce the panelists. I'm sure everybody can hear us. Today we're going to be talking about solving the data paradox, which is really how we wrangle big data and digital transformation and the value. I want to thank our panelists. We've got a great group here today. Starting right here, closest to me, we have Tom Allman. He's professor of practice accounting analytics at Wake Forest University. He's doing some pretty unique things in the master's program that we'll talk about. Prior to joining Wake, Tom was a principal with Deloitte Risk and Financial Advisory Services. He focused on financial services industry, specifically in banking and capital markets. He has experience in forensic litigation, corporate investigation, data analytics, discovery issues, and process automation, including use of RPA and cognitive intelligence, and has just some great stories too. So about his career at Deloitte. So he'll give us an academic perspective as well as a big client. Next to Tom, we have Sanjay Barwani. He's a managing director and advisory services at Ernst & Young. Sanjay is in the data analytics practice, aligned to wealth and asset management with a focus on investment risk technology related services. He is an entrepreneurial leader with experience developing products and services that apply risk management, cloud computing, and data science technologies for investment managers and financial institutions. And then we have Omar Hanataya. How is that?
Perfect.
And he's actually the CEO of a portfolio company called Ameribest Home Care. And he's going to give you more of a company perspective. He joined Ameribest in 2010. He served as administrator and director of operation roles before being promoted in 2017 to CEO. He leads an entrepreneurial organization in the most competitive home care market in Pennsylvania. Omar has taken Ameribest through 2 successful sales in less than 5 years to private equity. That's since he became CEO, and he's overseen multiple acquisitions, home care agencies throughout Pennsylvania. Additionally, Omar has led Ameribest to continual organic growth and leads through innovation and market know-how. He has built an analytics platform that not only reports multiple levels of operational, financial, and marketing information, but continues to build on predictive attributes to forecast and drive decisions. Under Omar's leadership, he's grown his portfolio company from about 24 million to over 70 million right now. And a lot of it is a result of how innovative he is. So for those of you who just joined us, welcome. We're talking about solving the data paradox, which is really how we wrangle big data and make it work, what value it provides for us, and digital transformation. So welcome. We kind of dubbed it the data paradox within our firm. I'm Alex Morris. I run Atlantic Partners. We've been around for about 20 years. We do consulting in finance, accounting, technology, and have most recently added digital transformation to the process because, in our opinion, it is the way of the future and it is a game changer for companies. So what we talk about internally is the fact that because of technology today, because of social media, we have a flood of information, but we actually have a lack of information to make actionable decisions on. And so we're going to talk about how we change that and where we are in the middle market and what trends are. Middle market has been slow to reap the untapped value of their data. There was a Deloitte survey that went out. It's a little bit aged, but they verified that we're still making significant investments in technology to enhance decision makers. Over 55% of CFOs actually report using some sort of method to use data for better decision making. They use it in customer experience, retention, and services. But I'm here to tell you digital transformation can be used throughout the organization. We focus in finance and accounting. Only 35% of CFOs are automating finance processes through digital transformation, which is a shame because there's a lot of SG&A costs to pick up there. Middle market companies, really the biggest problem is they don't know how to unlock the value of their data. There's a lack of knowledge and on the available tools that are out there, and the majority of the companies don't have strategic data plans. So today we're going to talk digital transformation, what exactly we mean by digital transformation, how important it is to your future strategic plan, why is it important, and how does a middle market company get there? Because it's easier than you may think it is. Okay. So I want to start off, there's a little bit of a semantics issue, and I've talked to the panel about this, we've talked internally about this within our organization. What is digital transformation? So I'd like to start off and ask, the panel, Tom, can you kind of give us your idea of how you define digital transformation?
Great, thank you for that. So, Alex just said the kind of an exact definition around digital transformation. One of the issues I would say, quite honestly, is that there is no exact definition. It is a little bit of what and where you are with respect to kind of your level of understanding around data and the data that you actually have. So let's still break it down a little bit more finely. What is really kind of this digital transformation? In some fashion, it is really just simply being able to use the data that you have and the data that is out there in order to get to more actionable insights. It's not just defining, if you will, a KPI or creating a dashboard, but it perhaps begins with rationalizing the data, getting the data, going through a process to put the data in a form such that you now all of a sudden are going to be able to use it more successfully by understanding what it means, and in particular around insights. So I see that digital transformation first off as being one that would allow you to get to speed faster with respect to the data, but more importantly, speed to the insights. So you've got to obviously move from an environment of a collection of disparate data sources into an environment that now could actually be organized more successfully through data relationships. And then on the back end, being able to use a series of tools and processes to all of a sudden now get you level of insight. And some of that is around predictive environments, but some of it is just simply understanding a dashboard. What does it mean? How can you successfully use it? And be able to deploy that to others so that they understand where it is you're trying to go. That's how I look at digital transformation.
Thank you. Sanjay, do you have anything to add?
Sure, no, absolutely, and I agree with the way Tom laid it out. But when you're looking at this as a practical matter to extend on Tom's thought, right? Within the firm, you probably have, say, 8 or 10 different systems. You might have information in a Word document. Maybe you're getting information or research as a PDF coming in. So all of that information is data, and it's stuff that you can start to mine to get to insights and to use that to make decisions. So you've got a lot more information within the firm than you probably realize, right? And then there's also a lot of information outside the firm that you can start to bring in. And when you start to think about this in a private equity context, as a, say, private equity investor, you have information on the portfolio companies that you've invested in. But if you can sort of dig a little bit deeper and then maybe sort of work with them on extracting insights, you can take that a lot further. Just to kind of add to what Tom said as well, it's important to sort of frame that the digital transformation in terms of outcomes, right? So depending where you're on the journey, you can then say, okay, what are the outcomes that I want in the next, say, quarter or the next year or what have you, to have some kind of tactical wins on the board, so to speak, right? And then sort of plan that sort of digital transformation journey, kind of keeping that in mind. But with that, Umar?
Yeah, I mean, same story. I mean, you have as an operator, you have fragmented systems. You have your sales CRM, from our perspective in EMR, you have a call center data source. And so piecing all those things together so you can get valuable insights. At the end of the day, my job is to worry less about the infrastructure, but care more about the output. And so what are those outputs telling me? How do I just make better decisions to ultimately deliver good value to our clients and caregivers?
Yeah, actually, if I maybe add to it or come back around a little bit, at one point, everybody would say, well, I've got data. Right? Everybody's got data, everybody's got Excel. Everybody got models, everybody knows how to use those models, or at least some level of certain sophistication. But really, this data transformation is now being able to go beyond that much more successfully around, for example, simple tools around robotics process automation, and be able to use the data differently. And so, in some fashion, it's elevating where you are today with respect to the data, to really be able to create some better operational efficiencies, be able to manage costs differently, be able to look at data overall from a perspective of how you can grow your company and likewise find other companies. I mean, it is absolutely, no question, the future. I teach at Wake Forest now, as Alex said, and I tell the students, when I started working, we didn't have PCs. I started in 1982. I was still dealing with a mainframe and a mini. Slowly, pretty quickly thereafter, we now all of a sudden had a PC now that we were dealing with. Now, at the time, they were really big PCs, kind of a luggable, as it was called. Compact computer, had a very small little amber screen, really crazy stuff. Ultimately, though, that changed into an environment around big data. And big data now was nothing more than all of those data components coming together and the tools now available to you on the machine, that is on your desktop. And now being able to especially use data visualization to tell a story, to tell a more fulsome story around the data. And digital transformation is really truly taking all of that stuff truly into your individual hands and machines and companies, so that you can, as I said, create this actionable insight much more successfully than you ever have before. So it's the best thing on earth going on right now, I would say, quite honestly. So.
I agree. I mean, we're incredibly enthusiastic about it. What we run into is this big issue on semantics. Is it advanced analytics? Is it AI? Is it predictive? What is it? When we talk digital transformation, we're talking about the whole thing. How do we get to a point we have insightful information to make decisions, and how does that drop to the bottom line, and that's really important. And so, you know, it'd be helpful probably if you could tell us a little bit about kind of how we got to that point, how things have changed in the last decade. I know Tom talked a little bit about it, but what have you seen?
Well, to Alex's point, right, so, and to Tom's point as well, in some ways we're the victims of our own success. Like, you know, so computers were introduced, like 20 years ago, kind of years ago, they started to show up on everyone's desktops, right? And now you have all these Excel spreadsheets and all these documents created, but all that data doesn't really kind of stitch together, right? And the tools have finally gotten sort of good enough and easy enough to deploy that you can now mine all of that information, right? And I'll give you a case in point. So let's say you're running a finance function and you're doing this in Excel, and show, you know, the private equity world, you've got sort of analysts sort of banging out these models in Excel. That could sit in a kind of data-enabled tool, and we can talk about some of the solutions where you can actually, if you analyze the company once, you can reuse that quite effectively. Maybe also do kind of comparable analysis across much more easily, for example, right? And then start to take it a step further. Say, you know, we've only been looking at the financials, but what if we could tap into, say, the point of sale system of that kind of portfolio company to get a better, kind of more sort of color on revenue and track some of the issues that we might see in the financials a little bit earlier, right? So is there kind of potential for like customer attrition? Is there potential for kind of margin kind of changes and kind of shifts in the mix, so to speak? And you can tap into all these different pieces and bring that up, and you can do that quite effectively and cheaply. So it's not only information that you have within the organization, but also organizations that you've invested with. And Tom brought this up. There's a whole bunch of information sitting out there in the ether, right? And I'll give you almost a funny example. Like, let's say you've invested in a company, and one of the affiliates that they can depend on has a management team. They happen to go out, you know, big night in South Florida and get arrested, right? That arrest is on the public record. Wouldn't you like to know? And that's information that's sitting out there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, what else is there? I bring it back to March 2020 for a second, and it felt like the world was sort of caving in. So we had an attrition issue, and we were losing clients. We mobilized our workforce to work from home, and productivity was lost. So I wanted to run campaigns around retention. How do we save clients? That was the critical piece for us. And so we had all these fragmented, siloed systems, and we couldn't piece it all together. And so starting small, focusing on retention first, and just looking at things on a daily basis rather than a weekly basis. Once we pull reports out, tie it all together, it was already too late. We lost clients. And so starting small, focusing on those little things was important for us. And so just, you know, we went from 73% annual year-over-year retention to 81% by just looking at data much faster and getting better insights out of it.
Thank you. Thank you. Sanjay, can you talk a little bit? I know you deal with pretty large companies. There's a lot out there on case studies of companies that are using digital transformation and advanced analytics, and it's really dropping to their bottom line. I think I read Capital One is taking 20% increase to their bottom line. Marriott took a revenue model, and with their tools, they have used it for the hotels, have rolled it out to every aspect of the company. What are you seeing, and what are companies using it for that are larger?
Yeah, so from a large company perspective, we're working with some larger private equity firms to take some of these tools to some of the large assets, right? And it's around like customer attrition, knowing your customer better, right? So how do we think through what we call in the business like next best action? So if I understand all the pieces of my customer, the next time I engage with them, I can offer them a certain product. So let's say I'm a financial services advisor. I know their portfolio, maybe they're coming up to retirement, or they've had a death in the family, or what have you. If I know those life events, I can offer them that sort of next best action, so to speak, right? So try to mine a lot of that information and try to make it sort of understandable. And to Tom's point, really create sort of actionable insights. Like, it's fine to have data, but then how does that data affect things from a revenue standpoint or from a cost saving standpoint that you have? some sort of value creation around that. And the other piece is, which we're seeing across the board, is how do we take the learnings from one portfolio company and apply them across the portfolio? So we're doing a lot of that. How do we think about that while still kind of preserving the, let's say, sort of privacy, integrity, security of the data, but still taking the insights up and trying to apply that across. Like, let's say if I invested in a hotel chain and maybe a real estate asset, there's probably learnings from that hotel chain that could apply to my real estate investments as well. So that's the sort of things that we're seeing. And just one thing to kind of Alex's point, while we work with some of the larger private equity firms, a lot of the tools are extremely accessible though. So it doesn't need to be this sort of big bang, large approach that my firm takes, because that's the kind of stuff that we're focused on now. There's a lot of kind of tactical pieces that we do to get this kind of started as well.
Thank you. Omar, I know you talked about the attrition issue, but that's not really where you started. What was it that you were trying to solve for, and was an analytic product your first thought?
No, I thought about hiring people. Thought about hiring more analysts to just piece all these different data sources together, and that cost a lot of money. And so decided to go down a pathway of building a data analytics engine. So for us, it was really always a scorecard that was important to me. And starting really small, talk about client retention, of course, but hours growth as well. And focusing on specific client cohorts, what's happening with them, why are certain, why are hours deteriorating with certain clients, not others, and focusing on those things, but also our RCM processes, like how do we build faster, where are the processes slowing down. And so the data is great, and the visualization behind the data is good, but also gives you sort of insight into where are the problems within our processes. The tools, the data, and the tech is not going to solve it, but it gives you insight into where within your company can start solving things.
Thanks. I'm going to get a little more granular with you though.
Okay.
Because I want people to understand the power of the tools and the digital transformation that's out there. When we first started working, you had your information coming in arrears, right? Can you talk about that, and what was the first thing that you did?
Yeah, well, so yes, it was in arrears. We would look at things 2 weeks in the past or a month in the past. By that point, what the hell are we even talking about? It's already too late. And so, the first thing we did was introduce all the systems. This is the process it takes to log in. These are the reports you need to pull. This is what this module means, and so figuring that part out was the first step, and then getting to a place of success with retention, hours, and billing capabilities was the next. But yeah, the first step for us was frankly understanding all the systems and logging in and creating these robotic automation processes to get in there much faster and save significant amount more time.
So, and now would you say you're much more timely in the information you get to be able to manage?
Yeah, I mean, we went from bi-weekly and monthly to daily. So we're looking at everything on a daily basis. And that's the full gamut. Obviously, we started much small, but now it's everything. We're looking at our CRM data, like where are the leads coming from, how's our money being spent across different advertising channels. Hours growth across all the different branches, why are clients leaving, where are they going, how do we target them a little bit better. It gave us better insight into those types of things.
Just pick up on the Omar's point, right? What's sort of interesting is we talked to some of the larger private equity firms and we're working with them really closely. And initially the conversation, this is like maybe 3-4 years ago, was we're getting all this information from our portfolio companies. They're sending us, end of the month, we get all the financials, and we have all of this stuff, and we've done such a good job of stitching it together. Like, that's really not enough. You can't do much with that. I mean, there's no insight that you can glean from that. I mean, it's good to know sort of scorecard after the fact. But to Omar's point, you want to be in there and sort of go much beyond that sort of accounting, books and records kind of thinking, so to speak, to ideally sort of daily information. So you can actually kind of course correct in somewhat real time. So that sort of shift in thinking is really important. It's not just about that accounting information, but it's going a lot beyond that.
I think the data visualization part of it is so important too for the front staff. Like they adapt better to charts, graphs, and seeing how things are trending better than, you know, these vast amounts of raw data. And so that was incredibly important for us too, to make them realize, and this was even more sporadic throughout the pandemic, people sort of lost their sense of what am I doing? How does my job contribute to the organization? And so cascading all of their jobs down to the metrics was so important, but visually presenting to them was even more compelling and drove success. So I thought that was
We're gonna get, you know, a little more specific on how one goes about starting to set something up in digital transformation. But before I get there, I think it might be really beneficial to talk about the benefits, that you get from digital transformation as you're moving, in that
Yeah,
direction.
cost savings is one, for sure. We're not blowing out our SG&A costs, that's for sure. So that's incredibly compelling for us. But just better decision making too. You know, we're not making, decisions on hunches anymore. We're making decisions on what the data is telling us. And beyond that, there's just a number of different things that we can test out. So, you know, there's a lot of hypotheses-led thinking behind it. So we have a daily pay product for our caregivers. And so, you know, things like, do high utilizers of this product tend to stick around with our company more? And the data will tell us that, and we'll see it in a really nice, visualization behind it. And so we take that and apply that lesson across all our different branches. So little things like that really help move the needle.
Sanjay, anything on benefits of moving towards digital transformation?
Yeah, I think, we touched on some of these. One is, we put them sort of in two broad categories. One is sort of a kind of revenue benefit, so to speak, right? And there's kind of several, depending on the kind of business, definitely kind of understanding the customer better. We talked a little bit about that. If it's more of a, sort of manufacturing kind of business, there's a whole bunch of pieces that you can do just to improve sort of manufacturing operations. But to kind of Omar's point, the kind of cost savings alone can justify the spend on some of these pieces. And the other piece that's a kind of like critical, which is it's the, outside of the cost is the kind of risk mitigation. And so if you automate something, it's probably going to happen the same way each time. Humans are messy, make mistakes, right? So, and also in the long run, it just scales a lot better. So you can do, once you automate the process, let's say you had, say, 2 or 3 analysts doing this, you can now, scale up to the output of, say, 10 or 20 or what have you, quite easily. So when you start to think about it that way, it's also done in the same sort of form, fashion, so to speak. Right? So that's the way we kind of think about it. There's the revenue question, there's the kind of cost savings, of course, but then there's also the risk mitigation side of it. So the question we have our clients ask themselves is, what happens if somebody kind of messes this piece up? Right? What's the risk to your business? If you get this number wrong or you get this piece wrong, what's that downside? And you think that through, and maybe you want to harden that process. If it's not kind of type of thing.
Thank you. I think one of the issues with digital transformation and anything in technology is folks get scared because when we do an ERP implementation, it tends to be a very lengthy process and typically a very expensive process. But I think that's changed. And Tom, I don't know if you want to comment about the difference between basically digital and ERP. It's not the same thing.
Well, certainly not the same thing. In fact, I don't even think it's related necessarily on one level.
But it's technology.
It is technology, certainly, and it is data, underlying data that's out there. Yeah, I think the thing to look at perhaps is a little bit of this evolution of sorts, of what has happened. Maybe let's just start at the very end, and that is, hey, things are up in the cloud, things are much more accessible, as I said earlier. And so, in some fashion, I think what this gets to here is about looking at your processes as well, level of precision, level of facts that you have in front of you. ERP system, CRM, everything else, wonderful, except if they don't talk to each other, if they're not kind of rationalized together, if you will, then getting information out of those systems is hard to do. So part of the digital transformation is indeed looking at those systems and figuring out a different data structure perhaps. You might find that you don't need all of those tools, at least the same way that you were once using those tools. But now with kind of this digital transformation, especially on the robotics standpoint, and also where the data is saved and stored, and along with data visualization and other tools, now you can make something happen more successfully, more quickly than having essentially an ERP system, a CRM, whatever, which is a data store. I mean, quite honestly, it's a data store. It's everything else that's around it that's going to make the difference. And that partly is digital transformation, I think, quite honestly. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
And I think also with the evolution of computing, where we went from mainframe and dependency on technology, on IT alone. In the 80s, we went to personal computer, and we started to get apps like Excel. It's 30 years later, and we're still using it. The next revolution has really been moving to the cloud and the accessibility. And this changes the softwares and applications we have, and it brings them into the business units and business departments. Is that fair to say, they're that democratized?
oh yeah, very much so. I mean, look, let's face it, as I said, Excel. Now, everybody can sit around and say, I hate Excel. I don't like the Excel, it does this, it does that, and quite honestly, it's a fantastic tool. I think, quite honestly, we just don't know how to use it that well. Now, having said that, there are many, many other tools that have, oh, we'll get the tools.
I would love to talk about tools, because there are a lot, and I think it's important to familiarize people with them.
Well, what I would say first off is, hey, they're tools, and tools change. And depending on how well you know the tool, et cetera, so I could be agnostic or not, but look, at the end of the day, there are some standard tools out that are being used consistently, and I don't know, maybe Omar uses some of these, Sanjay probably uses them, around robotics. Typically three major players. There's UiPath, Automation Anywhere, and Blue Prism. Yes, there's zillions of others, but those are major ones. UiPath is phenomenal. Their stock price didn't do so well on their initial IPO here recently, but nonetheless, they're doing all right. But it's an RPA, it's a robotic process automation tool that has a certain level of predictive tools, a certain level of process, if you will. I just introduced to my students here recently something called Celonis, which is a process mining tool, which I think would be phenomenal for the PE firms that are looking at acquiring another company to better understand their process, and likewise to improve their process and perhaps learn from them as well. We use Tableau, we use Power BI, mostly for data visualization. There's obviously Power Query underneath that. We're using Alteryx. Alteryx is probably a dominant tool that I am teaching to the students. And I also see all of the students where they're going to work, they're starting to use Alteryx as well. What is Alteryx? I don't know. They would call themselves, I think, a data management software. Some would say it's data analytics software. I just see it as one of the tools of the trade that's able to manipulate data, to be able to use data for descriptive purposes, certain level of prediction in it as well. But the beauty here is that it's not coding. We're not coding in COBOL. I did that way back when. I coded in Fortran and coded in everything else. We made some transitions to Java and C and C++ and da-da-da. Now, these software tools are what's referred to as a low-code or no-code environment. So if you're using almost a little icon that is already embedded in terms of the actual underlying code to pull it together to create a process. Now, I often say to my students, hey, look, you create spaghetti and I create lasagna. And what I mean by that is that when they put all these tools together, it looks like a mess because they don't understand it well enough yet. And what I do is I try to create lasagna, meaning there's just one long strip of a process as opposed to everything else coming together. So if you know Alteryx, you kind of know what I'm talking about, especially. But there are tools of the trade, and the ones that I mentioned are probably the standard ones. Yes, there's RapidMiner, and yes, there's Qlik, and yes, there's IDEA, and everything else. But those are major tools. So think about Alteryx, and think about Tableau, and maybe Power BI, and of course UiPath. Those are the four major tools to use.
So
Yeah.
We're gonna have questions at the end if you, so, Omar, you used UiPath, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
and so just practically speaking, you know, everybody thinks it's kind of magic, but it's really just a computer program that mimics keystrokes, right? But there are huge benefits of it, and especially in the resource arena. Do you wanna talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, from a technical standpoint, I don't know everything, but, yeah, it's, instead of having a human log in, you have, a robot that's set up to log it for you, pull the report, manipulate the data, extrapolate the data, piece it all together, and it happens like that. I mean, within a second. So the amount of time you just save from doing that, is extraordinary. You just apply that day by day, week by week, it really starts adding up. And so that's, from just a time saving perspective, it is enormous. And that's just one report, that's one, you know, sort of, KPI that you're looking into. There's tons of others.
So it basically goes in and it does it daily. So for all the years, for those of us who have worked in preparing financial reporting, you know, we don't have to depend on the IT guy to write the SQL query every week to get the information we need to extract from our systems. UiPath has revolutionized the way we're getting information, and it's really a game changer. We're really big fans of RPA. Sanjay, anything you want to add about the tools?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Alex, and I think, you know, I'll pick up on sort of the Tom left off. You know, I was talking to Tom in the morning, but what struck me is that his students are accounting majors, they're not sort of data science majors. So the tools are, I'd say you're training them and there's still some rigor around it, but, they're not sort of seeking computer science or data analytics. I mean, it's an add-on. They're really looking at this as learning a tool that they can apply to, in the sort of, chosen profession of, like accounting and financial statement creation.
Right, I mean, I don't know how to say it other than, hey, look, they were gonna be an accountant. They were gonna be the bean counter, for lack of a better term. But what they also figured out along the way is that the marketplace is talking all about data analytics. So they figured out, hey, I need to know data analytics. And our particular program, I won't go into the whole thing, but our particular program is very focused on real world applications. I was Big 4, Big 8, Big 6 for many years. I led a practice that was very large. I wasn't touching RPA. I wasn't touching Excel myself. Quite honestly, I was a senior partner. I retired in 2018. But what has since happened then is that the students, in whether it's recruiting or the literature that they see, the people that they talk with that are already at these various firms, know that they need to have very strong data analytic capabilities. And the tools that I just mentioned and others are ones that are pretty easy to learn in many ways. Now, there's certain levels of sophistication like anything, but pretty easy to learn and deploy, and that is happening left and right. I often ask my students after they've come back a year or two later, where are you on the kind of the curve of data analytics, and where is that same curve with respect to your managers and senior managers and partners? Most of them join a Big 4. And when everybody comes back to me and says, well, I'm probably a 7 or 8 in terms of my sophistication, and the partner is still a 1 or a 2. The manager is maybe a 3, 4, 5, and so forth. And so the students, or the kids, I'll call them, have and see a tremendous opportunity to grow their own career and businesses because of, again, this data analytics capability.
No, exactly. And to John's point, I used to still work at Ernst & Young. I'm on the advisory side, so we actually hire data scientists and the kind of the geeks, kind of, so to speak, to put all of this stuff together. But we have the consultants that have learned some of the RPA tools and tools like Alteryx and are putting them to work in a matter of weeks. So you can see, I think, to kind of Omar's point, to Tom's point, one is that these tools are kind of, you can train almost anyone to get started, so to speak, right? And you can see benefits really quickly. It does help to think kind of strategically about these programs and think about, what you want to get out of them in the end, right? Because it's not really just about the tooling, it's about the outcomes. But it's not that sort of large, ERP, PeopleSoft, Oracle type implementation. It's more thinking kind of tactically about what can we get done through some of these kind of specific tools. And I think kind of Tom made a great point as well. The tool, you can be somewhat kind of tool kind of agnostic, so if you have a tool in your organization, start to deploy that and get going, so to speak. And then of course there are kind of pros and cons of, one versus the other.
One thing additionally to add there is that you must have domain knowledge. You can't just hire the IT person. If you ever joined a corporation, you know especially that those IT people say, oh, I don't understand those IT people. Well, that's because they're IT people, right? And that's great. But what you need, what we're trying to do, and I think what universities are trying to do across the US, is to bring in that accountant or the engineering or whatever aspect it might be, marketing, et cetera, and teach them also these tools so that they can have kind of that domain knowledge, granted at the student level, with now data analytics. And so likewise, you have to have somebody that knows the debits go on one side, we'll say, left side, credits on the right. So you've got to have a little bit of that, because otherwise you're going to find a certain level of frustration like you've never seen it before, because the two have to talk together.
Yeah, no, and so within my firm, we started seeking out a solution because of private equity and their portfolio companies. We had the platform and they did the add-ons and we had all these different systems. Resources were not always the best, talent was hard to find, and this was a game changer, but part of the problem we ran into, and we talked about this as a group, is the data, and we talk about a data maturity curve in our firm, about do you have the data to be able to develop what you need, and we, by the way, are huge fans of the ETL software, because in my definition, it's like having a little mini data warehouse that your people can use in a department as well. So anything about data and the quality of data that, and getting started, Sanjay?
Yeah, sure. I'll take that one, right? So, I'll start with an analogy of excuse me. So, if you think about, say, data as water, so to speak, it's going through your organization. You want to make sure that you have good data quality. So think about that sort of data quality process as a filtration plant almost, right? So to get good results at the end of it, that if you're using that data for either reporting or to gain insights or what have you, you want to make sure that you have good data to begin with. And easier said than done, but to get to good data, and Tom touched on this, you want the business, so to speak, to take ownership of that information, right? So the data is owned by the business. Like, let's say I'm setting up a new legal entity. The information that on that legal entity came from either the general counsel or the outsourced law firm. They have to provide you with good information to begin with. Let's say it is information sitting in a CRM. It's probably a sales rep or somebody else going out there having a conversation and then making sure that data comes in, and then maybe having a process around, making sure that it's consistent, right? So, if you think about sort of data as water or flowing through the organization, you want to make sure that you have a process in place to ensure that that data is of high quality. But it's critical to getting any insights from that information.
So, if you all were a middle market company, you're concerned about cost probably, you're concerned about your resources and time, how would you get started? How big a lift is this for that?
So I think, Alex, to some of the conversations we've had, right, you can get started really small. That sort of 1-2 weeks, automate a process, see the results, like, so to speak. Maybe you might have done this.
That's exactly right. You got to start small. I mean, you don't want to throw the full gamut. I want this and 45 different KPIs. You want to start small, and it really just starts off with having conversations around where your systems are. And frankly, if your data sucks, your decisions will suck. And so, we had that issue with our CRM. We weren't getting good data out of that, and so figuring out our return on ad spend metrics was a difficult endeavor for us. And so just making sure you have some good data was the first step for us. And that was was really the most difficult part of the process internally. But once you flush through that, it becomes a lot easier, just introducing all the systems and the processes that are in there. It took 2 weeks.
And you don't need to start with predictive. You can start very small in the SG&A arena where you're, getting data pulled now instead of depending on someone. You're rationalizing the data through some of the ETL softwares and combining them. You can really kind of plan through and take it step by step, I think. Is that fair to say?
Definitely, yeah, we didn't know how predictive was for a long period of time, but once we got better, and started iterating over and over again, then we really started getting more creative and asking ourselves really interesting questions. And so we did a couple of things, really, just thinking back on some of the stuff that we did was focus on what employees are gonna leave. So we went from the I think to the I know, and so got around to 90% predictability on what caregivers are gonna churn. And so that gave us context onto targeting these particular caregivers and engaging them more and just having better conversations, understanding what makes them tick. And so retention rates went up with those individuals. We started campaigns around determining hospitalization risk. So looking at 300 data points within our nursing assessments and determining who's going to end up in the hospital, why, and targeting those people and being more holistic with our plan of care approach. So that didn't start from day one. It took a long time to get there, but once you start getting the grasp of these types of things, it really starts expanding your mind frame.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, the way we attack it with the larger private equity companies is that we focus on a specific piece so we can get value immediately. Think, immediately as in 4 to 12 weeks or maybe 2 to 12 weeks. Then we try to also kind of layer for them a more kind of strategic program because typically they want to go across all their assets, right? And that sort of strategic program is a 3+ year program. And we kind of lay that out for them. The other piece I would mention here is that we want to get buy-in to these programs from the top, right? Like we work with now, I'd say the top 5 private equity players, and we're having this discussion with typically the founding team, CEO. That's the level of discussion, and that's the level of engagement that we want to make sure you get these things. And you can sequence it. Maybe it is you do the tactical first, you have some value, and then you can bubble up the conversation. But it's important over time. We work with a lot of companies that I can't share the support, but their marketing or the PR is that we're investing in technology, we're data driven and talk about all of that stuff. Right? But when you look under the hood, it's still the Excel spreadsheets. This really isn't sort of data driven, so to speak. And if you're investing in this stuff and you're buying into that message, you've got to start to eat your dog food as well, and there are benefits to added. You can actually get to sort of cost benefit just with the cost savings alone, given the technology.
Yeah, I think it gives you an edge too. We're in such our niche market is so crowded right now, and it wasn't always crowded, but as it becomes crowded, you either win on price or you win on your customer service platform and quality. And so it gives you an edge to target a little bit better, engage better, and really build your customer service platform from within, because you're not going to win on price and have great margin, great return.
I have 2 quick questions I want to ask the panel. Can companies strategically avoid doing digital transformation at this point?
Sure, and I don't. I mean, look, here's the way I look at things, and that is that you can continue on doing exactly what you're doing and have no growth. No, that's okay. You decide. If on the other hand, that you wanted to be bigger, you wanted to acquire more, you wanted to be more operationally efficient, whatever it's going to be, then unfortunately you probably have to do some level of digital transformation. Now, there's certain levels of sophistication, of course, that you can go with. You don't have to go whole hog, and I certainly wouldn't recommend you going whole hog on day one. If you start small, you figure out what you need to do. EY has a fantastic approach around what's referred to as the analytic mindset, and that starts essentially with asking the right questions. What is it that you want to do? Why would you want to do that? How would we do that? And I guess the ETL, which is extract, transform, and load, is what it stands for. The next part is doing the actual analytics, and the final piece is around communication, so it's an overall mindset. But to me, yes, you can do nothing, and not go anywhere, and that's okay as well. I try to say that to my students, if this is the job that you want, then great, but if you want a real career, if you want it to grow, then, you know, you gotta do something different, and digital transformation is what you're gonna do.
The strategic edge.
Kind of talks about anger most part, right? I mean, you can choose to do nothing, but what you have to ask yourself is that, are you good, like, are you still going to be here, say, in 3 years or 5 years, if you choose that path? And each industry probably has a slightly different answer, and that time frame is different. But, I mean, it's almost like the yellow pages of the blockbuster strategy, right? If that's the one you want to pick, good luck, I guess, but also, you really don't want to invest in the wrong things. Like, we've seen this all the time, the companies want to go from 0 to 1,000, and say, now, you know, we want to be sort of modern and agile and digital and all of this stuff. So we're going to write that big check, but really not know what they're spending on, and that doesn't go back. Right? So you need to really kind of have, you know, think through what are you trying to accomplish. And then, I hope you got some Tom, the right partner on camera. Maybe you want as a good framework to think about.
You guys got the best framework around it, to be honest. I mean, everybody's got words, but yes,
No, exactly. So, you know, like, where do you want to go with the business? And that's the approach that we take as a practice. You know, where do you want to land as a business, and then go back from an analytics standpoint, where you need to go. But yeah, I mean, if you ask me, is not doing anything an option? I would say, to John's point, it is no, but, I'm sure, but.
So we probably have about 10 minutes left, and we can talk about this all day long. I do want to say one thing that Tom did bring up. What we're seeing as we go out recruiting is the universities are bringing this into their business schools now. It's, you may major in finance, you may major in accounting. Tom's really the one that we see doing it the most, but the other schools are trying. And so to be able to obtain resources on a go-forward basis, you know, I don't think you're going to find it as hard as you may think, finding domain experts that can use a lot of these different softwares. I want to open it up to questions for the panel. Do people have questions? Please.
I have one just about low code. So I had seen a company this year that we had started using QuickBase, if you're familiar with QuickBase, in 2011, and we eventually bumped up against like storage issues with data. So they're looking at moving to something else. So I'm in a new business, it's for manufacturing, but I love the low code because you can embed these VAs in every area of the business and build it based on your processes. And then you can get the data out and you can get push reports and all of that. Do you see limitations to low code or?
Well, I think there are some built-in limitations, if you will, and that is where it gets to a coding aspect. Again, let's look at Excel. Excel, in some fashion, you know, there's a tremendous programming code behind it that you can deploy. The same applies to Alteryx. While it is a low-code environment, there is a programming language with it. In UiPath, there's something referred to as DAX, and on. So the limitations of sorts are, I would say, are mostly around the limitation of understanding the software well enough to be able to code in it. So most people are going to use low-code environments for what it is set up kind of out of the box, and that works really well. And I would say it works probably well for the vast majority of, or the percentage that you really need it to. But yes, I think there's always some built-in limitations for any of these tools in terms of what you're able to do. But most of it has some code behind it that you can learn. So you can go beyond kind of the out-of-the-box limitation to be something much greater. Great tools.
I mean, you made an observation early on about when you first started in the mainframe. Project forward, artificial intelligence, and all the things that you guys have been talking about. I mean, how far out do you think that is? 5 years, 10 years?
Some would say it's already here.
Well,
It's not mainstream already here for some things. It's very mainstream already. I mean, Google think why is Google successful? Because of machine learning. And machine learning is really what I think most of us will use around artificial intelligence. What is machine learning? It's simply mean the machine is learning from the actions that are happening and your reactions to it to build a better solution, if you will. That is here, but it's not mainstream. I think in my own mind, it will be very mainstream in probably 7 to 10 years. I think it takes a little bit of time. I just met with one of my Chinese students who was telling me all of the things that the Chinese market has with respect to payment processes and how much of a non-cashless society they have become. And whereas in the United States, we still have a number of things that are kind of still working together, either with cash or through a lot of different other systems. I think all that's going to change. So to me, I think certainly in a 10-year window, things are going to be dramatically different than where we are today. Metaverse and all that is another sort of strange scenario, but machine learning is really what it's about. That's what I see.
Just on that, just to take on that, right? So we're seeing sort of machine learning applied in back office mundane applications now. Right? So when I shared an example earlier, so let's take a fund creation document, for example. Right? We can apply machine learning to extract the key sort of artifacts from that document, and then also check the quality of the document based on what it always done previously. So that's machine learning that we're applying at scale at some of the large investment organizations now. So, and to Tom's point, you're going to see it sort of seep into more mainstream applications, but it's also embedded in a lot of the low-code, no-code type software that we see. But it's getting like the tools when they're smarter, they kind of sense and know what we want to do. That's a piece of artificial intelligence built into these technologies, and you're probably using that. I mean, even Excel has some notion of AI now, right? Built into it as well.
Thank you. Question?
I was just wondering if you had, thoughts on where the blockchain platforms, blockchain, we could probably spend a whole, other hours and hours on that. But interestingly, when I flew to New Jersey to interview for the position I have now, almost 6 years ago, on my return flight, I sat next to someone who I, on their advisory team, who explained blockchain to me during the flight. So 6 years ago, I know you guys were, talking about a lot of that. So I'm wondering kind of where that fits in, if it does.
I'll give you maybe a 30-second, and it is a much larger conversation and a little bit off topic in some ways, right? So our view on sort of blockchain, so to speak, or distributed ledger technology is that it is the technology itself is here to stay. How it manifests, we're not sure, right? And then we always get asked about the coin kind of question, right? So maybe whether it's Bitcoin or something else, who knows, right? But the fact that you have distributed ledger as medium of exchange is here to stay. But what's really interesting is that over the last 5 years, we've seen sort of platforms come up, and one of the big ones is Apple Pay. That is a trust-based system. It's like an old-style system where you trust the Apple is like standing in as the old-style bank, so to speak. Right? And you still have newer platforms coming up that are the sort of old trust-style system, so to speak. As opposed to what blockchain allows you to do is for a transaction to happen and be negotiated without having an intermediary step in and provide that sort of trust. Right? So it's an interesting question. We think sort of blockchain definitely here to stay, will expand, will go beyond where we are now, right? In terms of just medium of exchange, but also things like real estate taxes and things like that. Right? So all of that will happen. Coming into the mainstream, and you probably know some of the industry initiatives, like from an investment management standpoint. There's a startup called Paxos, for example, that started being a clearinghouse takeover from DTCC. So you see some of those things, but they're definitely not mainstream. I'll just pause there.
Go ahead. We're running out of time, but.
So it doesn't always go great, right? Like we just saw how Zillow has to shut down their house flipping business because they tried to go all AI, machine learning, robotic process, I don't know. And however they thought about it, there were some intangible type, characteristics that they were unable to predict and ultimately build. I don't know if it's maybe like, it could be a result of the pandemic and like kind of the upside down economy we have right now, just through all those strange phenomena going on, and maybe it would work under a different type of scenario, but it failed. So, you know, to your analogy about using water clean like that and stuff, like, how do you assess when, you know, how big your blind spots are and your probability of success when you're trying to clean data? Because, you know, it's hard to understand, like, whether you have a piece of the whole thing right or a big part of it. Just a framework.
A very short response, right? So for, you know, to clean data, it's three pieces to consider. It's a process, people, and technology, right? But you've got to focus on the process and people. I think there's another example where frankly was more focused on automation as opposed to, you know, what does that information mean? And I think you touched on that as well. You've got to kind of trust your gut as well when it comes to looking at some of that data. And the last piece is that on this journey, like, you will see failures, right? But the question to ask sometimes is, if it was a small bet for them and they tried something new and they learned from it, maybe it wasn't that bad, but that's a debatable point. That's good.
I don't know about you, but if you've ever gone, yeah, if you've ever gone on to Zillow or any of those sort of sites, we'll say, and look at the price of your house, can you believe that? So I just don't understand how on earth Zillow could have believed their numbers in their house valuations. If that's what they were buying, say, my house for, I'm glad to sell it. But, so that's why I think they ultimately failed.
Someone, I didn't have a question, Oliver. No, you're good. Oliver, you're next.
So do you see RPA as a potential way to, you know, make ERP systems a little bit less unwieldy?
Yeah, I think so. I think any of this stuff is particularly, or can be unwieldy, because of using around RPA. So, some people initially put in RPA because they wanted to get rid of people. They said, hey, we're going to eliminate these extra resources. We're going to eliminate them. But I think what they also soon began to realize is that the information that you can get out of it, like Omar said, much faster. Much faster. And what I also found, I dealt with a very, very, very large bank, one of the largest in the world. And we were looking at all of their processes with the idea that they wanted to get rid of thousands of people. What they also figured out was that we're doing a lot of things that we just don't need anymore. They didn't know that going in. And as a result, they streamlined a number of things, and yes, they did get rid of some people, but they also shifted people and all that other stuff. Now, I think whether it's RPA or whether it's some of these other tools, to be able to use the data from CRM, ERP, et cetera, that's what you need to think about. Because again, those environments are mostly a repository of information. It's not really a data store to be able to use for other things. We're probably out of time.
We are, and I just wanted to take a minute to thank Omar, Sunday, and Tom for joining the panel. The information's been great, and we really appreciate it. And thank you all for.